Hey folks, Nathan P. Butler here, and welcome back to Nate's favorite deck building games. This series has been on hiatus for many years, but I'm finally returning to it because now time permits a little bit more, and there's plenty of cool deck building games for me to show off here. Now, what we're going to find in the first few episodes of this sort of return of the series is that in many cases I'm going to take a quick look at some deck building games that I've actually looked at in more depth in separate videos. Typically a content overview video where I go through all the different cards in a particular game and a lot about how they play. These are going to be those short sort of snapshot versions to show you these games in case you might be interested in playing them as well. So in this case, we're looking at Star Trek Star Realms, which is in part a reskin of Star Realms, the classic deck building game. We will be continuing our look at more Star Realms stuff in the future to pick up where we left off. So far, there's been a base set of Star Trek Star Realms, and there has been the Borg Invasion expansion. The base set of Star Trek Star Realms is just a reskin of the original Star Realms deck building game. Every card effectively the same as the newest printing, just reskinned for Star Trek. Your starting deck has 8 scout ships instead of 8 scouts, still giving you 1 trade each. I'm assuming here that you're at least somewhat familiar with the original Star Realms, so I don't have to get into all the bits of how that one plays. You then have 2 cards that instead of giving you 1 trade are going to give you 1 combat. In Star Realms, that is your Viper. In Star Trek Star Realms, that is your Raider. Notice similar iconography, at least in terms of coloration. Then you got your always available card, which was the Explorer in Star Realms, and the Decora class Ferengi Marauder here in Star Trek Star Realms. Again, equivalent in every gameplay respect. You get enough there for 4 players, so 4 starter decks worth of cards, and then 10 Decora class. Then you have 80 cards, 20 per faction for your trade deck. The Klingons are effectively your machine cult reskinned. The Federation is essentially the Trade Federation. The Romulans are the Blobs. And the Dominion are the Star Empire. One thing that Star Trek Star Realms has that those earlier base sets, so the original set, Colony Wars, or Frontiers, for Star Realms didn't have, is it actually does have a little fold-out cardstock mat here to help you organize and give you some reminders. So it has a reminder of the phases of turns, of the different symbols and what they mean, which are very similar to what we saw with Star Realms, of course. The place for your always available card, your 5 cards of the trade row, your trade deck, and your scrap. Not great because it's cardstock, but at least it's something. There are playmats available for the game, but as we will see, that doesn't really make sense right now until there's one also for the Borg Invasion expansion. So as with any game of Star Realms, it is relatively simple. You have your hand of cards, you have your deck. When you play cards, you are generating the trade value there in yellow, and you can use that to purchase cards from the trade row or your Decora class always available card. They go into your discard pile. When you have to interact with your deck and it's empty, you reshuffle all of your discard into a new deck, hence cycling the cards. Standard deck building game stuff. Star Trek is about as straightforward a deck building game as there is, and that comes across as well with Star Trek Star Realms as a very basic entry point into the genre. Fun, but honestly, it really, for me, takes the Borg Invasion expansion to put this up into something that I would play over sometimes regular Star Realms. We'll talk about that in a moment. You're also generating a combat value there in red. You use that combat to attack your opponent. As in Star Realms, you have regular abilities that trigger on a card when played. You also have ally abilities down here. So when you play another card of that type on your turn, you get the bonus as well. You also have 2 types of locations. In this case, they refer to as locations and outposts rather than bases and outposts. Your locations go out into play. They stay in play as the bases do in Star Realms. You've got a combat value perhaps, or a trade value perhaps, or some other ability. They might have a scrap ability, whatever. But they stay in play until someone uses combat to knock it out for the value in the corner. Gray is your regular locations, essentially equivalent to bases, whereas red is your outposts. So just like in Star Realms, if one of these is out, they must be taken out first. None of your other locations or the player themselves can be dealt damage until these are taken out. And yes, your health in this game is still referred to as authority, just as in Star Realms. It really is effectively the exact same game. until you add the expansion. The expansion is the Borg Invasion. Now, it has its own board here that interacts with the other board, but I'm just going to get the other board out of the way here. If you want in-depth details of exactly how this Borg Invasion plays, specifically the solo cooperative mode or the PvP mode, don't worry, I've got a whole separate video on that. That is my Star Trek Star Realms Borg Invasion content overview video. Again, Nate's Favorite Deck Building Games is going to try to streamline if I've already covered something somewhere else. In fact, if you're interested in seeing exactly which cards in the base Star Realms game every single card in Star Trek Star Realms base game is equivalent to, that's covered in my Star Trek Star Realms content overview. The Borg Invasion expansion brings 3 things into Star Trek Star Realms. 2 I already mentioned, a solo and cooperative mode, where you're fighting against the Borg, and a special PvP mode that essentially is 1 versus many, where regular players are going up against one player who's playing as the Borg, kind of similar to the Dragon or Lich decks that you could play with in Hero Realms, Star Realms' sister series, which we'll be covering soon. The third thing it introduces is something that Star Realms had as well, which is gambits. We'll look at those first. The Borg Invasion expansion has 25 gambits. Now, the gambits in Star Trek Star Realms are horizontally oriented, not vertical. If you're trying to think of where have I seen this design in Star Realms, they are vertical in Star Realms. And they'll have some type of ability, but there's no cost. It's not something you acquire during the game. Essentially, at the beginning of the game, every player is dealt 2 of them, and they leave them face down nearby. At the beginning of the game, or during their main phase, they can flip it up to reveal it. Some of them have reveal abilities that take effect. Some have effects that are across the entire game. Some of them you flip over and there's no effect except a scrap ability, and you can scrap whenever you like, not necessarily even on that turn. They're basically just extra little abilities that players can have that are asymmetrical. You can play with gambits or not, doesn't matter. The key thing here is that in the rules, according to the expansion, everybody does start with 2. It's not variable like it is in base Star Realms. In the base Star Realms rules, it's that everybody gets the same amount that's agreed upon, or you can vary how much each person gets as a way of handicapping the game to make it more difficult or easy for certain players based on experience. That's not laid out as a variant here within Star Trek Star Realms. While gambits are cool, we've seen basically all of these before. They are essentially equivalents of either gambits we saw in Star Realms with the original gambit set or the cosmic gambit set. There is no crossover, though, with any of the gambits found in the Star Realms command decks. I would note, by the way, they also have a horizontal back, whereas, of course, your locations have the regular vertical back, like so, because they have to go in the trade deck and then into your deck without you knowing what it is. Then there are 2 modes where players play against the Borg, either an automated Borg or a player as the Borg. I go into great detail with this in that Borg Invasion content overview video, so I won't belabor the point here. Suffice to say, there will always be a Borg ship, the Borg sphere, cube, or tactical cube, that have different amounts of authority, so different health, essentially, and then a different hand size for the Borg player if you're playing the 1 versus many mode. How you decide which one you use is based on the player count. Essentially, if there are 2 players, so either 2 players against the bot, or 1 player is the Borg and 1 non-Borg player, you're going with the sphere. If there are a total of 3 players, even if 1 is Borg, you're going with a cube. If it's 4 or more players, you're going with the tactical cube. They have nice references on the back, and essentially it's going to start right here. You notice there's a little dot. This dot is going to line up with the dot right here, and that is going to line up with one of the spaces on the trade row. Speaking of the trade row, there are 30 identical, except for artwork, drone cards in the game. There's 6 different types of artwork with 5 copies each, but they all do exactly the same thing. If you're playing against a bot, cooperatively or solo, these get shuffled into the trade deck after you lay out the first 5 cards. If you're playing against a player playing as the Borg, they're going to just keep this as a supply near them. If there is a human Borg player, then they get 2 special Borg gambits rather than regular gambits. And they actually get a special 12-card starting Borg deck. Though in PvP, they can still generate trade and purchase cards from the trade row just like a regular player can. Now, the Borg ship can move. It's a second regular step for the bot, in which case it just moves 1 space toward being above whatever is the highest cost card in the trade row. If there's a tie, it goes for the closest. If there's still a tie, players choose as a group. But it can move one space in those directions. When there's a Borg player, they can do the same thing by moving one space in any direction at the start of their draw phase. In the case of playing against the bot, when you've moved it, the very next thing that's going to happen is it's going to assimilate whatever card is directly underneath it in the trade row. Assimilating means you're going to put that card onto the ship. As players, one of the uses that you have for your combat that you build up, aside from blasting away at the Borg ship itself, is that you could spend combat equal to the trade cost of an assimilated ship to knock it off of there and put it into your discard pile as a new part of your deck. On the other hand, if it's still sitting there at the beginning of the Borg's next turn, the first step of the Borg turn, even before they move, is that any assimilated ships, either when playing as the bot, go into the collective, or when playing with a human Borg player, they acquire it into their discard pile as if they had purchased it. Your Borg human player is going to build up combat, as I mentioned, the normal way, but the bot is going to gain one combat to use against each player per card in the collective. So right now it would be one blasting each player for one. It's not spread out, it's the same amount to each player. Then you got your drones. Let's say you're playing with the bot. The drones are in the trade deck. When one comes out, when you're trying to refill the trade row, then you set it aside and keep filling up the row, but then this drone is going to go to a target player. I go into detail on how that works in that other video, but it's going to go to the play area of a player. And these essentially build up. And when they go out, an assimilate action can happen. Essentially, you count up the number of drones, and for each one, it counts as one. So if there's 3 drones, the number is 3. And then you look at your discard pile for that player, and they will try to assimilate, that is, take a card and put it on the ship, equal to that cost. If there isn't one, it tries the next lowest cost, and so on, whatever it can actually afford. And then whatever drones were necessary to pay that cost get put into the scrap. And if it weren't needed, stay there. That's another thing that you can do with your combat. You can blast the drones for one combat to knock them out. So your combat can be used for either attacking the Borg ship, clearing off these assimilated ships before they can go to the collective or go into the deck of the human player, or you can take out some drones to keep them from pilfering your deck, or assimilating your deck. When you're playing as a human Borg player, it is similar, but the drones are not in the trade deck. Instead, they've got that supply that I mentioned. And after they assimilate at the start of their turn, putting the card into their deck, again, if it's a human player, then they just take a drone from their supply and they can put it in front of whichever player they like. And again, that still can trigger that assimilation action if they want to trigger it right then. Note that that's a choice, though. They could let them build up and then trigger it later to get a more expensive card from your discard. There is some choice for a Borg human player. Moreover, when a card is assimilated, again, meaning that it is taken from a discard for either game mode, or in the case of the bot mode, the solo or cooperative, assimilating can also be from that trade row as that step right after moving. You're going to pull out a so-called hive integration card. There is one for each faction. There's a PvP side and a solo cooperative side. You essentially take whichever one matches the faction and the game mode. You're going to put it into the hive integration area over here, and whatever the ability is that's on it triggers immediately. But it stays there until the start of the next turn for the Borg player or bot, and then they get removed at the beginning of that turn. So it can only happen once until the next cycle of the Borg turn. So the Borg player gets a benefit from varying what it's assimilating, and that happens upon assimilation, not upon going to the collective or into the deck, so they get it even if you then knock it away and save that ship for your own deck. The Borg are also always learning. They're analyzing your technology. So anytime that a player has dealt damage to either, again, the Borg ship, an assimilated card they are trying to free, or a drone in their player area, you're going to look to see which of the cards that dealt combat dealt the most and check its faction. And whatever faction it was, let's say it was the Talis refit here, dealing 5 or perhaps even 7 combat, if there was another Romulan card out there in play, you're going to check that faction, and then pull out a force field card for that faction. At least in its first printing, both sides are color. The rulebook says one should be color, one should be grayscale. Honestly, it doesn't matter because you're going to be putting them in this area or removing them, so sides don't really make a difference. But you're going to grab that faction's card and stick it in the force field area. While a faction's card is in the force field area, cards of that faction cannot generate combat at all. The Borg are effectively immune from any of their combat abilities. However, if at the end of a player's turn, there are more than 3 sitting here, so either 4 or 5, because there are ones for all the factions, including one for those unaligned ships like the Decora class or your starter cards. As long as there are more than 3, they all clear. At the end of that player's turn, damage is now possible again. So essentially it's like they've, modulated their phasers or whatever to get through the shields, but it took them some time, or whatever. If you're playing against the bot, there's rules for things like breaking ties, for how they distribute their attack, and even a player elimination step where if a player gets taken out, they're able to take one of their cards and put it in the discard pile of a player of their choice to help them out. But in broad strokes, that's the Borg Invasion expansion here. You get gambits that can be used in any mode, and you get 2 separate modes to play against the Borg, with one player as the Borg kind of like a boss against all the other players, or solo or cooperatively just against the Borg as a player. That differentiates it from base Star Realms. Yeah, Star Realms has gambits, and yeah, Star Realms does have, things like those large challenge cards that we got in Frontiers, small versions, actually small versions of a couple of these in the original Gambit set. And some of them do require some, rule clarifications and whatnot in the Frontiers rulebook, but we really haven't seen something quite like those Borg modes for base Star Realms. This is a lot more like what you would see with Hero Realms, although the battle against the bot is kind of a middle ground, I guess you could say, between Star Realms and Hero Realms. But that one versus many is very much like what we see with a particular pair of options that we will see later for Hero Realms. Although, of course, playing a bit differently, because this is using those unique Borg mechanisms. I really wasn't quite sure about this initially with Star Trek Star Realms. It was cool to see the base set, but really, it was an introductory level game. Maybe it was going to bring in new players, but it was just the original Star Realms set that we've been playing for years, reskinned with no frills at all. It's the Borg expansion that, for me, really kind of puts this over the top and allows this to stand on its own and be something that I will be playing possibly even more often than playing cooperative or solo for Star Realms. It's just a bit more robust as a solo or cooperative mode. The fact that there's also a 1 versus many mode, well, that's just the icing on the cake. And that is our look for Nate's favorite deck building games at Star Trek Star Realms thus far. We'll of course have more episodes in the future as they release more content. As I said in the content overview for the Borg Invasion expansion, live long and prosper, even if resistance is futile. 'Cause I promise, it usually isn't.